On my right, furthest right, is Marcus Bleasdale. He's been photographing Congo for almost 10 years, and tomorrow we'll be showing a collection of photographs, and has a book coming out shortly, yes, which is going to be a huge book, really, a huge amount of Marcus's work. So Marcus Bleasdale. On my near right is Molegwa Zihindula, who used to be Joseph Kabila, the President Joseph Kabila spokesman between 2002 and 2004. So many journalists used to come into contact with Molegwa. He's currently at SOAS taking a peace degree, a peace studies degree. And he's from Bukavu in eastern Congo in the Kivu. And he's here not as a government spokesman because those days are behind him, but just as an independent commentator, but obviously has acquired a lot of insights during his work, and spent a lot of time in Sun City during the inter-Congolese dialogue, which led to the peace agreement signed between the various parties. On my left is Dino Mahatani, and Dino used to work for the same organization I worked for, the same organizations, in that he was with Reuters and the Financial Times, lived in Congo for a period, and he's just coming up very likely to join a UN panel which is going to be investigating violations of the arms embargo to eastern Congo, is it? And one of the elements he'll be focusing on for that panel is the funding of the various groups involved in the conflict in eastern Congo. Since we're trying to call this Demystifying the Congo, and I think I've been sort of writing and following the Congo for quite a while now, since I was living there in '94. And I think there is a good question to be asked whether journalists routinely misinterpret the Congo, especially journalists who haven't been there, and whether donors also misinterpret it, and maybe the countries that are trying to help, and the NGOs and funders who try to help the Congo also misinterpret and misunderstand it, and therefore spend their money maybe on the wrong things. I wondered if we could just start by talking a bit about the images we saw in that film, most of which came from eastern Congo. The International Rescue Committee keeps us updated on death tolls in the Congo, which are absolutely horrific, as we have seen, 5.4 million since 1997. But as somebody who writes about Congo, I'm very aware that those, that the violence, the death toll and the suffering, it tends to be represented in the press. And I think when Susan Rice, the Secretary of State, talked about there being a First World War, an unacknowledged First World War being staged in DRC, she didn't help an understanding of the situation, because when most of us think of the First World War, we think of trenches and piles of bodies of people killed in conflict. And that's very much what's not happening in the Congo, and especially in the Kivu area, where most of the conflict is taking place. In fact, according to the International Rescue Committee, just 0.4% of those deaths are caused by conflict. So that's less than 1%. So I just thought we'd talk to Marcus, because Marcus is very much focused in his trips to eastern Congo, on eastern Congo. And if people aren't dying in conflict, talk us through what you see when you go there, what you see on the ground. How are they dying?
I think it's probably more effective to talk about how they're living, because that explains quite a lot about how they're dying. And the majority, if we take first of all the population that has been displaced, they're living in camps, very much like you saw on the pictures before on the introduction. Certainly in the east, that means that they're living in areas where the ground is volcanic, so there's no absorption of waste, feces, vomit, which is a general and a very regular production within a refugee camp or a displaced camp. So there's nowhere for that to go. So it just hangs there in this camp. that fuels diseases like cholera, typhoid, and the conditions that the people are living in then exacerbate the death toll. So it's very common in very early stages of camps being set up before the aid workers, the NGOs, move in to try and establish a decent level of hygiene, that the death toll is anywhere between 20 and 40 per 1,000 per day of under fives, which is extraordinarily high. Anything over 2 is considered a human disaster. And these numbers stretch into their 30s and 40s sometimes in some of the camps when they're initially set up. But not everybody's displaced in Congo. You know, there are people living in villages. There are certain tribes that because of their ethnicity, they either don't need to displace themselves, or they affiliate themselves with a certain warlord, so they can and do live in the local zones that they have grown up in. But then they don't have access to medication, because the access to medication means that they have to travel over a front line. Then they become quite obviously not the tribe of the ruling government, and that's very easy for the ruling government soldiers to see. And so, for example, if we take what's happening in the Kivus right now, we have Nkunda's forces who are...
And just explain who Nkunda is.
Nkunda is a warlord who alleges to protect the Tutsi population in eastern Congo from the persecution and death from the Hutu Interahamwe. And maybe Malego can discuss that at detail a little bit more later on. But he says that he's protecting the Hutu population in eastern Congo, the Congolese Hutus.
Tutsis.
Sorry, the Congolese Tutsis, apologies. And the Interahamwe essentially have been targeting the Tutsis in eastern Congo.
The Interahamwe are the people who committed the genocide in Rwanda, who fled into DRC, eastern DRC, back in 94 and have been there, this hardcore, ever since.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We're actually now in the second generation.
Yes, I mean, these are the sons of the Interahamwe in many cases.
So these Tutsi population in North Kivu are targeted allegedly by the Hutu population, and they live in the villages around. They have no access to healthcare. They have no access to medication. They have no access to food, because also food is a huge problem for health. If for example, you're a farmer and your normal crop will be planted in March and harvested in June, July, August, the level of security that you're going to have, and whether you're going to be in that place where you plant your crop 3 or 4 months later, is a big question. And whether you're going to be able to harvest it, you may be in the same area, but then it may be harvested and stolen by the local military or by the local warlords. So all of these factors, where people are living, the access to healthcare, the access to agricultural land, the access to stable areas where they know they're going to be for several months so they can farm, all of these factors contribute to the 99% of deaths in DRC.
And is the situation, is it worse or better if you're in an IDP camp, or does it just...
Depends on the camp,
yeah.
really, and it depends where you are. Some of the camps are atrocious and unforgivable, actually, as an international community, that we create and don't administer them in the way that they should be administered. Unforgivable. But there are others that are excellent. Mm-hmm. So it depends on who's running that branch of UNHCR in that part of the world.
Is it a question of access as well?
It's a question of security, access, funds, resources. And if you speak to World Food Programme executives, for example, they'll say we just don't have enough food. We can't distribute enough food. We don't have it. It's not here. We don't have the funds. The way that the international donor community works could also raise a very big question about what's happening in Congo and why it's happening. I'm sure maybe Malego can go into a little bit more about that later on.
Well, I just wanted to ask Malego, because Nkunda isn't the only force in that area, and we have the Interahamwe, the FDLR, who are this group that came over from Rwanda. There are also other people, and I mean, it seems to be an area in which there are militias running around with guns, preying on the population. Is that a correct depiction of the situation?
Okay. First of all, I want to thank the Frontline Club for having considered to bring me here. And also, I want to say that I'm no longer a spokesman for President Kabila, so the opinions that I'm saying now or I'm expressing are my own opinions. So I don't want anybody to mistake me for speaking on behalf of President Kabila. Now, about the armed groups, there's a lot of armed groups right now in the Democratic Republic of Congo. They are running rampant right now in eastern Congo. They've spoken about the FDLR. Many of the FDLR are remnants of the former Rwandan army who have come to the DRC, and as they have said, actually many of them died. Many of them died, and there's still a few hardcore ones. But most of them now are, second generation. These are the children of the guys who committed genocide. So it's not all of them that are people that committed genocide. And, they prey a lot on the population. In South Kivu and North Kivu province mostly. They prey a lot on this population. It's a very bad group of people. I have done 14 sorties in areas that are controlled by the Interahamwe, and they have been doing a lot of atrocities, a lot of raping of women in eastern DRC. But they are not the only ones. There's a lot of groups. There's some of the Mai Mais, or so-called. I think the Mai Mais in the beginning, in the war of 1998, were probably...
Let's just explain who Mai Mai are.
Yes, yeah. The Mai Mais are supposedly, Mai in Swahili means water. Mai Mai is water. These are people who believe that they have a special water that they can pour on themselves, and if you shoot them, they're not going to die, that kind
and
of thing.
And is a Congolese militia?
Yes, they're a Congolese militia that was created actually as an anti-foreign troops. They were created when many of them were trying to fight the Rwandese, when Rwanda was fighting alongside with the RCD and the ADFL in the Democratic Republic of Congo. So some people have begun to call themselves Mai Mai, but these are opportunistic people who have been part of one militia or another that, and they are also preying on the population. The Congolese armed forces also. The FRDC also, now, as you know now, the army that we have in the DRC is a mixture of forces that came as part of the peace agreement in 2002. So we have an army that is made up of different people. It's not a regular army. It's not a trained army.
It includes rebel forces.
It includes former rebel forces and so on and so forth. They're not a disciplined bunch. And so many of them are also preying on the population. So the population really is at the mercy of everybody right now as we speak.
And you see the position with Nkunda as a key to unraveling this situation, yeah?
Yeah, now I think, what has happened in the Democratic Republic of the Congo is Nkunda, first of all. My friend did not tell you a lot more about Nkunda, but Nkunda was part of the RCD, which was one of the armed groups that was trying to fight to overthrow President Kabila. Now, Nkunda, in my view, is a criminal. I think in my view, he's a criminal who was involved in killing a lot of people in May of 2002. May of 2002 in Kisangani. He killed a lot of people. Now, after the reconciliation process went through, he was made a brigadier general in the armed forces, but he refused to go to Kinshasa. Now, his excuse is that he's trying to protect the Tutsi minority. But I think this is an excuse that he's used, and I personally, and I think a lot of observers of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, he's a person who is being used. His groups, the group that he runs is called CNDP, is just a proxy force. It's a proxy force that is being used by Rwanda to make sure that they continue certain activities in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. But he is a criminal, in my view. There is an arrest warrant actually against him that has not been unsealed yet by the ICC. But his chief of staff, there's an arrest warrant that has been unsealed now for the past
This is from the International...
for International Criminal Court.
Yeah,
has put out an arrest warrant against his army chief of staff. His name is Bosco Ntaganda. And they are trying to arrest him. Human Rights Watch has asked Nkunda actually to let this guy be arrested. So he's a guy who's involved in a lot of atrocities. I think the whole idea of trying to protect the Tutsi minority is a fallacy. But
so behind this man sits Rwanda.
In my view, I think Rwanda is very nostalgic about the RCD times, the way they ran the place. And so they need that. They need a person like Nkunda. But also because of Nkunda, there is a lot of troops, groups springing up. Because they all look, the government cannot protect us. The armed forces in the country are not strong enough. So why don't we create just our own small group to make sure that Nkunda one day does not occupy the rest of the country?
Let me ask Dino here, because you're the sort of the financial expert on the panel. Who is funding these various groups? I mean, there are these accusations that there are Rwandan interests involved in supporting Nkunda, and that's why he's still there, that's why he won't give up, and that there's a sort of dirty game being played between these two countries, and that keeps Kivu in a state of conflict.
Yeah, beyond the beyond the funding of neighbouring states for the likes of Laurent Nkunda, I mean, in the run-up to the election last year, there was a rapprochement between Kinshasa and the Rwandese government. So that relationship has sort of, in a way, dissipated somewhat. Although clearly there are recruits in Nkunda's army who are coming from across the border. But beyond the help of neighboring states in the past, the key ways of funding are armed groups sitting on top of mineral resources, opportunistic politicians operating within the country who are vying for influence,
yes.
And pushing their agendas, creating conflict to benefit, to put pressure on the government in Kinshasa, in particular Joseph Kabila, the president. And thirdly, and most damagingly of all, and this relates a lot to what Marcus was saying, is the taxation of local people. I remember on trips into the bush in eastern Congo, we'd go past an FDLR checkpoint with FDLR fighters and machine guns and gumboots controlling a section of the road. 2 miles up the road, an atrocious road, you'd have Mai fighters with AK-47s unloading trucks who are trying to get through to supply villages with basic commodities, and then in the town were, former rebel fighters in fatigues. And it's the interplay of all these taxes that...
So, and if you're an ordinary peasant producing cassava, you will get taxed again and again and again.
You can't move your stuff to market. You're suffocated you're isolated in a community that can't access markets or basic healthcare and so forth. So, and this is the most damaging of all the methods of funding.
Right.
Yeah.
Can I just raise, I mean, often one of the cliches in the press that you so often read is if there's a sort of idea that if we stop buying mobile phones as a Western public, everything in Congo would be okay. It's very simplistic. It's all about coltan. Coltan being Colombo tantalite, which is one of the minerals in which Eastern Congo is particularly rich. I mean, there's a sort of idea that instead of blood diamonds, we got blood mobiles kind of thing. There are obviously the mineral resources of DRC continue to be an integral part of this very complicated story we're trying to trace here. But it's not, coltan is no longer the issue. I mean, we've moved on from there, haven't we?
Yeah, I mean, in the eastern Kivu's regions, it's, I mean, the buzz trade at the moment is cassiterite, tin, there's gold, there's ivory trade, there's drug smuggling, there's all kinds of businesses. Even in one of the main ways that Nkunda is making money now is migrating cattle herds across the border from Rwanda to obliterate the pastures of people in those communities, and thereby causing more local conflict. So it's a whole variety of...
It's plundering, but it's not just coltan, it's not coltan. It's cassiterite being the key one.
Yeah, and there's certain smuggling routes that are, material comes in from the bush, it gets thrown together in what are called comptoirs, which are agents or dealerships in Goma and Bukavu, particularly in Goma. And so it's very difficult to then identify, from which mines under the control of which armed groups this material is coming from, and then it's shipped out, exported through Rwanda or Uganda, and then it reaches the international markets. And in the case of one mine, which was controlled by a renegade Congolese army battalion, the 85th. Was sitting on a big tin mine in Bissier, which was, some of that material was undeniably being pumped into the supply chains of various electronic companies around the world.
Mm-hmm. I think one thing we have to think about as well is that, this stuff gets exported probably and mostly gets processed in South Africa, ends up on the international market, and because of the increase of commodity prices over the last 5 years, it's a lot more. People can fight a lot more with a lot more weapons, with a lot more bullets, because they're selling their tin or their cassiterite at a lot higher prices than they were 5 years ago. Right. So it becomes a lot more profitable to continue this war than it does to stop it.
Can I just, we've had a panorama program, which I think we're showing here at the front line, talking about the UN. After all, Congo has got the biggest UN force in the world, 17,000 UN troops based there. Panorama focused on the abuses being committed by the UN in terms of individual Indian and Pakistani officers trading gold for weapons and actually giving weapons to the FDLR, the very organization they were supposed to be helping to pacify. We've also had sex scandals in the past with the UN peacekeepers preying on the local girls. Marcus, you've seen a lot of these people in action in Kivu. Is Panorama giving us a fair depiction?
Yes and no, I think. First of all, I think you caveat this with it's very difficult to prove definitively what's happened and who's done it. A lot of the instances that Human Rights Watch have been talking about, and many of the reports that have been brought up certainly in the last just few weeks with a lot of the human rights organizations talking about instances that are several years old. So it's taken them that long to prove, but they are for sure happening. The UN have bought gold for themselves in Eastern Congo. That's undeniable. It's more a question of, I think what we should be asking is more fundamental questions of why are they there? They're there as a peacekeeping force. And what are they doing? And maybe one of the films that we're seeing this week, I think by James Brabazon, will kind of show that the UN in some cases have been providing artillery support, bombarding villages that are rebel strongholds, but quite obviously have civilians, women and children still living in them. And the FIDC have been supported by the United Nations in bombarding these, and this is
the Congolese army, yeah.
Yeah, and it's on film. And that film will be shown later on this week. So we have to question the methods of the United Nations and what they're doing. Whether what they're doing their fundamental mandate is important. It's more the methods that they're carrying out to achieve that mandate. I think we should question.
Well, Egwa, as a Congolese citizen, what do you think of the UN's record to date in the East?
No, I think people need to be fair to the United Nations, because I think if we are at the stage where we are today in the DRC, I can't say today that the DRC is at peace. But I think if we were able to hold elections in the DRC today, we have to credit the United Nations for this. I think if you are not seeing another invasion from another country, it's because there's a lot of people who are afraid to go after the UN troops. Now, I know that the UN is like any organizations, and they have individuals. These are not saints, and I'm aware of the sex scandal that happened within the United Nations. I'm aware of the failure of the United Nations to protect the people of Bukavu in 2004 against Nkunda when he first came after the people in Bukavu. I'm aware of that. But, I think that's microscopic, I think, or minute. compared to what the United Nations had done. You know, the United Nations under William Swing in the Democratic Republic of Congo, there's a lot of things they did. We had a Pakistani general who was controlling South Kivu, General Shujat, I believe that was his name. You know, there was a lot of good things he did. I remember going to him with him in a place called Ninja, where there was a FDLR people preying on the population, and he threatened them. And he told them, he said, listen, I'm giving you 3 days to leave this place. If you don't do it, I'm coming after you. The Interahamwe said, no, you don't have the mandate from the United Nations to do that. He told them, he said, listen, my mandate does not come from the United Nations. My mandate comes from Islamabad. I don't know if you remember him, Shujat.
No.
You know, and the guy said, well, you can't do anything. He said, okay, you see that gun over there? That can shoot 1,200 rounds in a minute. And if you want, I can give you a demonstration right now. Within 3 days, I mean, it didn't even take 3 days, and they left this FDLR. So I think...
so it seems to depend very much on individual commanders on the ground.
Yeah,
and
you know,
their
I mean,
attitude.
you know, yeah, I think, you know, there's been some abuse, like in a big organization like that. You know, I think you would find some problems like that. But I think these problems are being blown out of proportion. You know, I don't think it's that bad. You know, I think we owe the United Nations today what they've done in the Congo, the elections. We didn't have the material to do that. I mean, they've put at our disposal a lot of things. There's a lot of hearts and mind operations being carried out by the UN. But, you know, I understand. And it's wrong what has happened in the Congo if a few individuals within the United Nations, within MONUC did that. But there's no MONUC policy to say that we are going to arm such and such a person, we are going to arm people in Ituri and so on and so forth. These are individual actions, and we should take them as such.
Could I make a point about this? I mean, some of you may see the film later on in the week, the Brabazon film, The Unreported World. You know, I think films like that are useful in showing, you know, the realities of on the ground, you know, warfare, and how the UN interacts with supporting you know, a national army, but it doesn't fundamentally answer the question why, why these abuses are taking place, and that is because of the structure of the army itself, and over the years the lack of international funding to rebuild a core element of any nation state is a standing army, and this is one of the reasons why, you know, however many thousands of Congolese troops weren't able to take out 7,000 of Nkunda's men, and they were forced back last year, and it was a savage humiliation. And in the process of retreating, of course, there was looting and pillaging and raping. But the core reason for this is as I've said, the lack of international funding, and you know, the former head of the UN mission in the DRC admitted as much by saying, you know, just before the elections were taking place, that, you know, yes, I admit that there wasn't enough funding over the years to rebuild the state, and yet there was an election, you know, within days there was fighting on the main boulevard in Kinshasa.
Donors get very excited about elections. Those elections cost $400 million. And it was remarkable that they were staged at all in a country with roads and the condition, the size of Congo and the condition of the roads and the communications. And our country, I mean, Britain picked up most of the tab. But there is this whole question about whether or not donors are getting fixated with symbols of democracy and stability, as in elections, when in fact maybe that money would have been better spent trying to get the Congolese army, which is a shambles.
Yeah, I mean, the head of the French general who was put in charge by the international community of helping Congo distribute its military salaries, and at the time there was a lot of embezzlement of these salaries, which exacerbated the problem of the troops and their behavior, said, you know, quite bluntly that the international community are doing two things. They're counting money and they're following a moral persuasion about what is right and wrong. You know, and at a time when the Congolese when all this money, $500 million, was being pumped into holding an election, the IMF was threatening to withdraw funding for, you know, budgetary support for the DRC because these salaries were being looted. But at the same time, unless you pump money into the system and get it off the ground, nothing's going to happen. So it was a very imbalanced approach to holding to statescraft in a way.
Well, let's talk a bit about the government, because so far we've been focusing on Eastern Congo, and that is the humanitarian crisis and the conflicts taking place in the east. But of course, Congo is a huge country, and it does have Joseph Kabila as its president. I've ended up interviewing Joseph Kabila twice, and he always struck me as he was someone who sort of slipped through one's fingers as an interviewee subject, in that you met him, you thought he was very nice, he seemed quite bright, and you thought, I've really enjoyed that encounter, and now I'd like to meet the president of DRC, because it was very hard to imagine that this charming, sort of evasive, not particularly forceful character was actually heading this important country. And I just wondered, there is this big question mark of Mulegwa, of, who runs DRC? Obviously it has a parliament. It's a country that's been used to an incredibly centralized form of rule under Mobutu Sese Seko. Is Joseph Kabila the man making all the decisions? Is it the people around him? Do ministers have real power in the country?
No, I think that question, it depends on when. There's been three Joseph Kabila. One, the first Joseph Kabila was in 2001 when he took over after his father was assassinated. And then he brought in, a group of people and so on and so forth. Now, I think in every political structure, everywhere in the world, there's always maximum about 4 people who are really in charge of things. There's a president and maybe about 3 confidants who run the show. I have known Joseph Kabila for years and years and years. I've known him way before he was president, way before he was, even a general in the Congolese armed forces. But I think Joseph Kabila is sort of a president who comes up with ideas. He will come up with an idea, he'll say, I want this. Mm-hmm. And then he would delegate this to certain people who come back and give an account to him. He's not a flamboyant president. He's not like Mobutu. Mobutu was a chief. He wanted to be seen by everybody with his stick and his hat and everything. Kabila is not like that. He's more of a laid-back guy, and he says, look, this is what I want. I want you to do this for me, and he gives you a responsibility to do this. He wants you to but the initiative always comes from Kabila. This is Kabila 2001. Then there's Kabila from 2003, during the transition, to Kabila up to the election. Now here, there was 1 president and there was 4 vice presidents. Mm-hmm. Now, those 4 vice presidents, each person ran a commission. And the president, Kabila, was supposed to chair everything.
This was a sort of unhappy marriage of
this was a very, very unhappy marriage. It was a very bad time, and it was one of the reasons why he had asked me at the time to become a spokesman, because he wanted me to work as a bridge between him, Bemba, and Roberto Amosi. Mm-hmm. Which I tried through my press conferences at the time.
The key former rebel leaders who joined the government.
Yeah, exactly. Now, at the time, again, I think there was a lot of people around Joseph Kabila who tried to say, listen, you cannot be so laid back as you've been. You have to become tough. I remember one time I was sitting with him in Lubumbashi. He gets a phone call. There had been a fight at the Grand Hotel. I don't know, I think you remember this, between Bemba's men. One of Bemba's men came from Brazzaville, and he bit one of Kabila's men ear and took it off. Now, Kabila's people were ready and said, look, we got to go in. We got to go fight this guy. We got to take him out. He said, no, you're not going to do that. Just let it go. Mm-hmm. Okay, I think that's his system. He's more of a guy that waits, but he's not. I think people misunderstand him to be weak. Mm-hmm. He's not as weak as people think. Because when he decides to act, it's after some times, and he goes after you with a lot of force. Like we saw after the elections.
Right.
After he lost, he didn't lose, but when he did not win the elections in the first round, we saw what he did. He went after the guy who was his nemesis, because Bemba, because he thought the guy was not going to get to that point, and he was very upset about this, and and he wanted to sort of teach him a lesson. That's a system. And then now we have the new Kabila now.
This is the last.
Yeah, the last Kabila, the legitimate president of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Mm. And now
who won the elections.
Who won the elections.
Yeah.
And now this is a completely different Kabila, where now he's saying, look, The day-to-day operations of the government have absolutely nothing to do with me. I have a prime minister who's Gizenga. And I think the prime minister sort of failed in his responsibilities. You know, I think he's a little bit too old and he's not been able to do anything. And this is a different Joseph Kabila. And there's a lot of decisions which are being taken at the presidency now instead of being taken by the prime minister, because the prime minister
So it
is
remains a
bit
very
asleep.
centralized
I
system
think
of power.
Yeah, Kabila is a strong guy. You know, I think he's a very strong guy. I think a lot of people have a wrong impression of him because they see him a little bit like this. But, you know, don't take that. He's not like that. He's not. That's the image that he wants to portray to people. He wants people to think that he's you know, he's a weak guy. But there's nothing that is done in Kabila's circle that he does not have a handle. Yes.
But is it not true that he has certain advisors who've been there even before, you know, from the time when he was thrust into power after his father's assassination, and it's been difficult to break out of that kitchen cabinet?
Well, I think that's what a lot of people think. You know, I mean, I think Simon was in Congo when Mwenze was Kabila's minister, and everybody felt that Mwenze, this strong Mwenze, nobody can touch him. But Mwenze went. Kabila got rid of him. There's a lot of these people. You remember Kazadi, who was running the ANR, you know, and you saw the human rights abuses the guy was doing, killing people with knives and so on and so forth. Where is he today? He's nowhere to be found.
So he's a wilier operator than he seems.
Yeah, he's a lot more than people think. You know, I mean, when he disliked, I mean, he got rid of a lot of these people. And there is some of these people, and they go out there and they want to portray themselves and so on and so forth. I mean, I know Kabila had one of his sisters arrested, because, you know, she was going to people and said, listen, you know, I'm the late president's daughter and the current president's sister, and he would take money from them and so on and so forth. And Kabila had this lady put in Makala prison for some times, and then he removed. You know, certainly, you know, there's a lot of abuses. I was reading today about some guy who came and he kept saying he was an advisor to the president of the National Assembly, Vital Kamerhe, going to people. There's a lot of people like that. But I think Kabila wants people around him to be able to make decisions based on what he did. You know, when I was his spokesman, he said, listen, you know, my vision is to reunify the country, to pacify the country, and to rebuild the country. Now you gotta create your programs around my vision. But he never told me, go hold a press conference. No, or he didn't say, from now on we're gonna start holding press conferences. No, it was my own initiative. But when I screwed up, pardon my English, he would say, listen, man, I didn't like what you said there. I think you should have said something different.
Let's talk about funding, because one of the extraordinary things to happen in the last few years is the way China has gone into DRC, and the extraordinary figures being bandied around, 8.5 million, and the idea that this money, a billion, not million, dollars, and that the idea that in a way this would provide the development that DRC so sorely lacks, and we're going to see these decrepit roads and railways being rebuilt by the Chinese. What's your feeling about this? I mean, you know, are we going to see the Congolese people getting anything finally in terms of medical care and infrastructure, or is this just going to be pumped into fueling the Congolese army and giving them new weapons?
Yeah, I mean, with or without China, or even without China, Congo is sitting on 10% of the world's copper resources and something like 30% of the world's cobalt. 35% of the world's cobalt resources. So, you know, this, I mean, during the 36 years of Mobutu's rule, you know, the amount of money that was bled out of the system, you know, was able to hold a man like that in power for that many decades. There is an enormous amount of resources there. And, you know, when people talk about the conflict in the East, as you mentioned, it's coltan. The actual heart of the belly of the beast, as it were, is in Katanga. It's the copper and cobalt sector, which is a mechanized industrial sector. And what's, I mean, China now coming in a context of high commodity prices, and certainly, you know, following a pattern of what it's doing elsewhere in Africa, striking these sorts of deals would give, you know, on paper, the Congolese government another option. But, you know, in the analysis of the deal that's been signed shows that just as much as the concessions were signed off in very favorable circumstances to major companies before, so with the Chinese. So it doesn't seem as if, this China deal has been really hyped up in the press. It's not a done deal yet. And the reason for that is that there's a mining review going on in the DRC where a lot of these concessions that were mortgaged off during the war to fund, the war effort on the government side, the government is now reviewing these. But it's not clear whether those that are held by interests that are politically close to the Kinshasa government will be reviewed as per how they should be reviewed, to give the government a better economic take.
And the World Bank showed a certain kind of naivety on this subject.
Well, I mean, I think there were 3 concessions given out in 2000 or ratified in 2005, signed off, before the World Bank was able to persuade the Congolese government to allow its appointed consultants sit on the board of the, or head up the board of the state-owned mining company, Gécamine. And the 3 concessions accounted for something like 75% of the mineral base of the copper sector in the DRC. And there was, so the World Bank was watching this happen, and there was an internal memo drawn up by, senior people in the World Bank on the mining side and on the DRC side, saying, these deals are being signed in a complete lack of transparency. They give far too much away. How could 3 companies possibly, put to work this amount of copper in an economic way, and so forth? And yet the government was able to sort of get away with it. Now, these 3 concessions are part of the 60 that are being reviewed. So one would, and the mining ministries put a load of these on their website. You can check it if you want. Doesn't make much sense.
So it's all very murky.
It's very nebulous. It's not clear. I mean, one of the concessions is given to Freeport, which an American company, I believe, had bought out Phelps Dodge, a huge mining giant that had. So the Americans kind of control that one, and then there are 2 others controlled by one George Forrest, who's been in a Belgian businessman who's been in Katanga for forever, and has been named in previous UN panel reports for helping to strip assets during the war. And the 3rd one is run by Dan Gertler's company, who's an Israeli businessman who also has a big deal with the diamond mining company. And these concessions are up for review. Now let's see whether they're actually reviewed to the benefit of the Congolese people. Let's see whether the China deal actually amounts to anything. And just to give you a flavor of the kind of realities and the politics of this, when there was I think the Congolese government sent a delegation to the UK a few months ago to talk to some of the mining community in an investment bank here in London, and one of Kabila's advisors who stood up and was given the floor to give the background on what would happen, had a tape recorder put in front of him by somebody else in the entourage. So the level of mistrust, because the president wasn't there himself, and he wanted to be absolutely sure what his man was saying. So, they're Chinese walls, and there's influence and power broking, and one wonders, what the quid pro quos are in such a review.
But this strikes me as having sad echoes of the Mobutu era, in which you have murky deals being done, where it's not clear where the mineral proceeds of this incredibly rich country are going. And that, to a certain extent, maybe the Western donors who are wishing and hoping for the best tend to show a sort of deliberate naivety about all of this, because they're desperately hoping that Joseph Kabila will be the man who can drag DRC through to something like prosperity.
Yeah, I mean it's been a quagmire. The international community have been under pressure to have a result. They wanted to have an election. The feeling on the street in Kinshasa during those elections, during the first round and certainly the second round, was that that this was an international coronation of a sitting incumbent president that was being forced through by the international community to effectively put the sign up on the DRC, open for business.
Legitimate government.
And to have a legitimate government,
Yeah.
and to have these mining concessions that are going to be ready to be picked off. I mean, the other example, which the World Bank again have been involved in, is the forestry sector. I think the DRC has the world's second largest rainforest in the world, after Brazil, during the last few years they've had a review of the forestry concessions, which, like the mining concessions, were given out willy-nilly during the war, and over the last they put a moratorium on issuing new concessions, and they've had a forestry plan, and the plan was to allow the Congolese government to commercialize its forest, its timber assets, to pull in crucial revenues to build the state. But even according to a World Bank assessment of its own policy, they hadn't even spoken to the communities in eastern Congo. They hadn't talked to the pygmy population. They hadn't. They'd only conceived of the forest to be used as a commercial resource. There weren't anything given over to alternative uses of the forest, maybe carbon trading, so forth. So on the one hand, you have almost this rush to use the resources to rebuild the state, but on the other hand, as I've given you the example, the IMF is saying, oh, but the army's looting, so and there are serious questions of transparency in the government, so we're going to hold the funding. It's a very imbalanced, and the last example I'd give is there is even a World Bank internal investigation of something like hundreds of millions of dollars that were given to the DRC during the transitional government for various social programs and so forth. And there was allegations of embezzlement, because this money was coming into sort of cells within Congolese government ministries that were supposedly being supervised by World Bank officials but run by the Congolese. So there's allegations of embezzlement, and there was an internal World Bank inquiry, the results of which were supposed to be in the public realm more than a year ago. And so on the one hand, the international community is saying, Congo, you're not doing enough, or your institutions are leaking everywhere, and you've got to shape up your act. And then when they come in and try and push their own agenda, there's a distinct lack of transparency on that front. So it's a very imbalanced approach.
I'm going to open it up for questions, but I just had one last question for Molegwa, because when we spoke earlier, he really surprised me by saying that Mobutu, who of course was reviled by the time he fled, is now back in fashion in Kinshasa at least, and people are wearing his face on their shirts. And I thought that must indicate that daily life, if you're an ordinary Congolese, has not changed that much since the great dictator, or maybe it's even got worse since he fled.
Yeah, actually, after Mobutu left, people said they were being told that they were liberated. Now, and then the war came, and people were told, look, it's because of the war that you've not been saved from your wars. When the war ends, you'll be saved. So then they began to talk about elections after, while we were in the peace process. And people looked at elections as a panacea for all their problems. When this did not happen, because the population in Congo really is going through very hard times right now. And now people have become very nostalgic about Mobutu's times. Because people are saying, well, look, at least during Mobutu's time, we didn't have a war. During Mobutu's time, the generals within Mobutu's army, they ate, and then the crumbs that fell off the table, we could pick them up and eat them. It's not the same thing today. It's not the same thing. There's a lot of people that have become very rich in the Congo in the past few years because of the war and so on and so forth. And the population at the grassroots, there's nothing that is trickling down to the population. I think the population is getting poorer and poorer and poorer and poorer. And so they become nostalgic about Mobutu now. You know, you could go on the streets of Kinshasa, somebody's wearing the hat of Mobutu, or somebody's wearing a shirt with Mobutu's picture. So people are reminiscing on the past.
It was also very prevalent during the elections as well. The use of Mobutu's image was very prevalent during the elections.
It has to be a real indictment of the current government.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much, all of you. And we have time for some questions. And if everyone could just stand up, say who they are, and then take the microphone. There's a gentleman over there, so why don't you start it off?
Thank you, good evening. My name is Frank Ledwidge, I'm a barrister. You mentioned very briefly the ICC. I was wondering what the panel thought about the role that specifically the ICC and more generally international justice institutions might have in the future in the Congo, or is it simply just too abstract and too distant from most people's concerns?
Do you want to answer that
Sure,
one?
sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Now, if you talk to me as somebody with a peace-building background, I would say the ICC, sure that the ICC is an institution, but I think right now for the Congo, I think that's a very counterproductive institution. I would say the same thing for Uganda, because I think what we need in Congo right now is some form of restorative justice. And I think what we are seeing with the ICC in the DRC and in Rwanda, it's being used as a tool, as a political tool, to get at your nemesis, at your enemies. So I think the ICC maybe in the future, but now we need some form of restorative justice.
When you say restorative justice,
yeah, we need some form of restorative,
of?
like what I'm talking about, like what happened in South Africa, for instance. We need truth and reconciliation commissions in the DRC to know what went wrong and so on and so forth. The victim needs need to be addressed, and that is not going to be addressed by the ICC. So although I have a lot of respect for the ICC, but I think right now, for the Congolese context for right now, it's not the appropriate tool, because they are only arresting certain people. But there is a lot of criminals in the Congo, everywhere, on both sides of the aisle. There's a lot of criminals in the Congo, and they're only arresting people from one aisle of the...
so it's being put to political use.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And I think also it's symbolic, in a way, in that if you ask what are the crimes that some of the people that have been arrested and are now in The Hague being held to account for example, use of child soldiers, how many years is Thomas Lubanga going to actually get if he's found guilty? And we might find a situation that he'll be released soon after being found guilty because he's already served 6 or 7 years.
Yeah.
Thomas Lubanga was one of the warlords that was very prevalent in 2003, 2004 in Eastern Congo, specifically in Ituri. And so we can ask, is the ICC actually providing a role, or is it trying to be symbolic? And if it's being symbolic, is that at the cost of the Ituri people? Because the Ituri people will have to live with this. Yes. Both sides of the war will have to live with the justice that's meted out in The Hague, and that will have repercussions in Ituri. And we have to question whether this is, for Ituri, the right solution.
And Ituri is where there was an awful lot of bloodletting, wasn't there?
Yeah, in 2002, 2003.
A couple of years back. Okay, great. You had a question, yeah. Sorry, can...
Hello, Dina. I'm Tricia Feeney from
hi.
Community.
Hi.
So I was interested in your take on the mining concessions, the Chinese deal not being a done deal. And I suppose I'm curious because I think, maybe the ultimate number of billions that's going to be released is not clear. But as far as I can see, the Sikamine-Jekamine deal is indeed a done deal, insofar as any of them ever are.
Yeah.
And it seems to be underlined by bilateral agreement, government to government, so makes it pretty hard to undo. And I would suggest, and maybe our friend from the Congo might tell me if I'm barking up a wrong tree, but it's a very powerful tool to use for the companies who are now undergoing this review. If they don't accept the new terms, then they've got other lives.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, no, I definitely, I agree with you, but you said it yourself, insofar as these deals have ever been a done deal. And I agree, it is, I did mention that it is a bargaining chip that the Congolese government can use. I've just heard through people that I know who are close to the Chinese side rather than the Congolese side, that there are concerns whether the execution of the deal will roll out as smoothly as initially envisioned. And certainly if you look at China's record, I know much has been made about China's activities in Africa and the press and so forth over the last few years, but certainly in other places where China is proactive, perhaps Angola aside, but certainly even in Nigeria, deals that are struck between governments and the Chinese, with promises of infrastructural development years ago, well, we haven't really seen anything. So I'm a bit skeptical.
I'm always very impressed that some of the biggest monuments in Kinshasa were built by the Chinese.
Yeah, that's right.
And they date back to the 1980s.
Yeah.
And so we have seen Chinese involvement in Congo before, which was sizable and left a lot of monuments that were not used for a long time and are just sitting there now, stadiums and buildings.
I think she wanted me to say
sorry.
something.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, it is true that Chinese history in the DRC, I mean, we could go into that even with Mobutu and so on and so forth. But with these mining things, I think if you look at these mining contracts, the way these mining contracts are being restructured, in my view, it's to find room for the Chinese. This is my view. They are trying to find room for the Chinese. Now, when you talk to the people that were involved in restructuring this contracts, what they tell you is that, look, we are reviewing these contracts because when we gave these contracts to these people, there was no legitimate government here. There was no legitimate government, and then after we have looked at some of this mining contracts, because these people came and they say, okay, this mining contract is only worth $6 million. But when we look on the stock market, these guys have put the value of these contracts at 600 million. And that's one of the reasons why they are reviewing these contracts. But also, another reason for reviewing these contracts is because there's been sort of the people who negotiate these contracts, maybe the bad blood. For instance, Forrest, no. He's not it's
not in good...
Yeah, there's been a few problems between him and a few people, And so he's Katanga mining. The shares within the Katanga mining for him have been reduced to, I think, 8 or 7.8%, I think it is. So, yeah. That's
this gentleman and then the lady behind her.
Thank you very much. My name is Antoine Lukongo. I'm a London-based Congolese journalist. And I'm glad to be here this evening. I'd like to announce that the title of the talk is very, very important, Demystifying the Congo, because that's exactly what I'm writing about. My book, with the title will be The Congo That Was Never Allowed to Be, just similar to this title today. And I hope Frontline will help us if we find a publisher and come here and present it to you. Because since King Leopold's time, Congo has been left like that for our comfort here. So I'm not going to go into a speech. I'm just going to go into a question and ask the panel.
Thanks, Antoine.
What will demystify Congo is when Kagame in Rwanda is arrested, because there are already 2 arrest warrants against him. No, if we find that Kagame was behind the genocide in Rwanda...
Antoine, your question, huh? Your question.
Yes, I'm coming. If we find that Kagame was behind the genocide in Rwanda and is supporting Kunda and other warlords and all the rebels in Congo, what will be the repercussion in the region?
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks, man.
Well, Egwa, why don't you talk about that? I know you feel strongly about that subject.
I'm being put on the spot here. What is going to demystify the Congo?
No, well, let's talk about the Rwandan issue, because that's the heart of his question.
No, but I think, first of all, I mean, I understand that we get caught up with this Rwanda issue as Congolese people. I'm Congolese, and I'm from Eastern Congo, and I'm not a fan of Kagame. But for Rwanda to be able to do what they have done in Congo, it was because of the lack of strong institutions in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Rwanda could never have invaded the Democratic Republic of the Congo if we had an army that can repel them back. Okay, so Rwanda is not that almighty African army that can destroy everybody. But what we need to do in the Congo, my good friend, is to build strong institutions. We need to build up a strong, inclusive political system in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Congo, as you know, and I think many people here know, the one big asset for the Congo is its people. It's a unified people. There is not one single Congolese person who believes that Congo should be a split country. Yeah. But now we need to build strong institutions in the Democratic Republic of the Congo to ensure that no adventurer from Angola, Angola has just taken a little piece of the Democratic Republic of Congo. I think a lot of people know this. But I think people become very uptight about Rwanda. But Rwanda is only able to do what they're doing in the Congo because we do not have strong institutions in the Congo. So to demystify the Congo, if you wish, I think we need to build strong institutions. We don't have to look to Rwanda. As Congolese people ourselves, we need to build a strong country. We need to have a strong army, a Republican army that can repel Congo. We need to get rid of corruption in the Democratic Republic of the Congo because our army is completely corrupt. I mean, a lot of the fighting you see, where our army cannot lose, as soon as they're given a little bit of money, they lose the war. So that's what we need to do. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, the lady over there in green.
Hi, my name is Rosamund Bain, and I'm just back from the Congo, making a film about the health service, and spent most of the time in the Western Congo.
Mm-hmm.
The first thing I'd like to say is that I find the kind of pornography of disaster that goes with the name Congo truly nauseating, best exemplified by the PowerPoint presentation before the actual talk, which I thought was, let's find some figures, put them up there and make everybody feel really sick. That, I think, is also followed by the recent radio series that was on the Today programme. Let's find an 18-month-old baby that was raped. Hey, I wonder if we can find a week-old baby as well. Now, the problem with this is not that it's untrue. Of course, none of it's untrue. But there's just such a lack of context. And I wonder where it takes us. It's great for white journalists, even better for aid agencies in the UN who can get lots of jobs and lots of money and go in. But I have a real problem with it. And I have tonight, I'm pleased to say the talk in the end did move to a wider area than Eastern Congo. And I think that's the one thing, I suppose the question, I'm not sure if I've got a question to the panel, but is it just about the pornography of disaster? Is that what we're about as journalists? So, the second thing I'd like to talk about a little bit is corruption. There's corruption in every government, in every place in the entire world. And I think one of the problems is that it's often used as a means of not giving aid and of not continuing with a policy. That the Congo probably surpasses most countries' ability to even think about corruption, leaves no doubt whatsoever. But I'm not sure what the alternatives are other than to continue to give aid and to try and find ways of accounting for this money. I have a recent example of the British government, God bless them, has recently tried to increase police salaries from $10 a month to $47 a month. And of course they forgot to check when the last time the police were paid, which certainly when I was there was in October. So it really didn't matter what the figure was on paper. So I think there's a long way to go. And finally, just on private enterprise, I see no alternative in the Congo but to find more investment, and in that it clashes with the pornography of disaster. I know quite a few people are not investing in the Congo because of the reports they read and the books they read, and ultimately I think it's to the Congo's detriment.
Well, I'll make a comment about the film, in that I think the whole point of that film, and obviously it didn't work for you, was to try and set in context what the point I made at the beginning of this talk, which is that this is a war in which people are dying of malnutrition, diarrhea, and dysentery, and not in conflict. And that's, as somebody who writes about Congo myself, that's one of the distortions that I get very annoyed about, because I regard that as a form of pornography of violence. I mean, there are many other points you raised. Is the corruption in Congo worse than elsewhere in the world? Yes, it is. You know, I also think, you know, I think we as journalists, we struggle with these issues all the time, but I suspect that you as an NGO worker would be sitting there. Sorry? Filmmaker. You know, if there's not one accusation, which is pornography violence, the other accusation is this conflict's being ignored. And that's one that, as a journalist who's worked in Africa for 14 years, that's the other one you always hear. So it's quite hard to tread the line there. I mean, I'm no admirer of the kind of reports that I've been hearing on Radio 4, and I particularly don't like the reports. I mean, I know you've got some views on this, Marcus, that come out of Panzi Hospital in Kivu.
In Bukavu.
In Bukavu, yeah. But
I think as journalists, and you know, we're in a journalist club, and I think we should, as journalists, ask how we report this and what is the best way to report this. And there are many ways of doing it. You have a view, which I think is extremely valid, and pornographic images, whether they be in Congo, Iraq, Afghanistan, become debased, irrelevant, pointless. People see them too much. You have to tell a story in a very different way as journalists. But you cannot ignore 5.4 million people dying. You cannot ignore the fact that when you sit and see 40 children die in front of you in one day, you cannot walk away from that and say, let's tell the story in a different way. This is horrific, what is happening here. And you cannot ignore that Congolese people are dying every single day. You can, as a white Western journalist, say, let's tell it in a different way, let's tell it in a little cooler way, let's go and do something slightly less full-on and pornographic, fair enough. But you cannot ignore the people are dying.
Yes.
And so, I'm sorry, but as a journalist, I'm still going to stuff that fact down your face until you understand that people are dying.
Yeah, I just want to dovetail. Yeah, let me just...
Nobody's denying the truth, but I'm sorry, I'm not having that crap given to me.
That's
it's the context of it. Of course people are dying. Yes. Of course, and I have been there and seen exactly the same. But just to put up figures on a PowerPoint presentation as if that's...
But we haven't only put up figures, we've been
sitting... what you did.
We've been sitting here for an hour and a half.
I did say afterwards the discussion has eventually expanded it.
It's okay, I get it.
What do you mean eventually?
No, I'll get it.
But it did eventually.
Eventually?
But the problem is that in the end, you know, of course that's the truth.
That
Nobody's
was a
denying
4-minute
and I object to
presentation.
having the idea that somehow I'm denying that the truth. I'm merely saying where do you go with that? You can only do what is happening, that every week something worse is coming out. That you then say, oh look, in order to top what Mike Thompson's done, I found this. And that is the problem, it's not contextualised, and worse than that, very few solutions are given. Only in the very last programme on the Today series did he talk about things like impunity and so forth. Up till then, it was just a litany of the disaster.
But this isn't Radio 4, okay? We're not here representing Radio 4.
Gets to more people in this discussion.
Yeah, madam, can I just dovetail on what my colleague here said, okay? I do understand, you know, I do understand. But I think in a forum like this, you know, and reporters do have a certain responsibility. The only way people are going to know what's happening in the Congo is on activities like what has happened today. You have admitted yourself that there is that what you've seen is the truth. And now, many people in the Congo do not have the voice. But a forum like this is a very important forum to raise awareness about what exactly is happening in the Congo. And the one way to get a solution to the problems of the DRC is in a forum like this. You know, that's where people get together like this and to begin to talk about solutions. Maybe colleagues who have made this film started this maybe to begin a debate on the Congo. I don't know the objective for this. But when you begin a debate on the DRC, I mean, it's good, it's very healthy for what you've said, but we can only find solutions in forums like this. But who in the Congo is going to go in an IDP camp or Panzi hospital where he was and find a solution? But when you hear about what is happening in Panzi, then you can begin to raise awareness. You can go to members of parliament here and begin to tell them, look, this is what is happening in the Congo. Please, can you do something? And I think that's what these colleagues were trying to do. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I would just top that or finish that off by, when you talk about investment, nobody's saying that, you know, that the DRC shouldn't shouldn't welcome investment, or investors shouldn't be discouraged to go and invest in the DRC. I think the point is that what benefit has much of the billion-dollar investment, particularly in the mining sector, actually brought to the people of Congo? And it's a very complicated question. It's not going to be solved simply by pumping more money into the system. It's a multi-headed task that has to do with, as Malego was saying, institutions and so forth. One of the key elements, transparency. And I think it would be doing a great disservice to many of the Congolese NGOs who work tirelessly and thanklessly to push for greater transparency for their mineral rights to be transferred into the well-being of their countrymen. Simply by saying that we should fling open, Congolese government should fling open its doors to investment, and everybody should sweep their skepticism under the carpet. Just don't agree with that.
Well, and I would just make the point.
This gentleman at the back, by the way, has had his hand up all night.
Okay, but I mean, can I just make a point? You seem to be attacking Radio 4 by attacking the panel. If you don't like Radio 4, complain to Radio 4. And also, you're talking. Can I just make a point now? You've. Can I just finish my point?
No, not wrong.
Okay. Well, I'd just like to say that, this was a 4-minute presentation. The whole point of this panel has been to widen out the discussion, talk about the mineral issues, the Chinese, who's running the Kabila, the government, what's the education system like. If that has passed you by, I mean, clearly we failed, but that was what we were trying to do, and I have been trying to do since the start. The gentleman here, please.
I'm very sorry. My name is Norbert Mpumputu. I'm from Congo. I'm a journalist and a writer. I live in Wales. So I'm very sorry because my English is the most broken in the world.
It's good. It's good though.
The thing is, I was working in the Catholic region in Kinshasa, but I was working in the UN since 1996 till 2001. And since 2001 to 2003, I was the director of an international British charity. Is important because you can understand most issues about the international community and the UN. So, and then I worked in the timber company, and in that company I saw the dark end of the Chinese, because the third person in this company was Chinese, and I was the secretary of the director. So I got some figure by that time. It was the first time for me in 2003 to see some digital map from Europe to come in our office, and I saw how was the contract, made between those person and people from the government, because I will come back in this issue, and I'm asking myself this question. I think it's very, very late to speak about the contract now. I'm wonder, it's like the Olympic torch. I think it's very, very late. The Chinese and other person have signed the contract. We have no idea. I just give an example of what I know about the timber in north of Bandundu and Equator. I think it's very, very late. I wrote an article in the Congo Vision about this issue. Second things, when we are talking about the UN and the international community, I think I must, in the name of Congolese people, to pay tribute to those organizations, because as said Mulegwa, the job those people are doing in the field is incredible. Mm-hmm. Myself, I'm from West, and when I was working, it was the first time that I was sent to negotiate something with Jean-Pierre Bembe in the North, but I was so frightened, and I said to myself that I will never go to the rebel area. So we must pay tribute to those people, because the condition they are working there, the aeroplane they are taking there, are very, very incredible. So we must really pay tribute to those people. Even though we got some individual, of course, who try to take the advantage of the situation. So what we saw, what a panorama show, I think that is not really the big politics of the UN. But of course, as Mulegwa said, you got some individual, Congolese and foreign, who try to take the advantage of the situation. We talk about, I think...
Just one last point, yeah?
Two questions. The first one, don't we think that when you said you just say something about Rwanda. That should be the very big mistake, because we learn in Latin that causa sublata tolix to effectus. If you want to cut the trees, you must cut the roots. And we know that the root of all those problems are the refugee from Rwanda. We agree to come in our countries, and if you want to solve this problem without solving the roots, that's not a very big mistake. Second issue, Molegwa talked about to have the very
Can you wind it up, Norbert?
Yeah, the very strong government. Don't you think that now, the thing that we have a government who is fighting about all those things, not you think that we will give the white check to this government to become a dictatorship, because there is no relationship with the opposition, and you know everyone is a consensus in the East, as Madame said,
Norbert.
but we forgot about the West. What happened now in the West?
Okay,
thanks
Norbert. Yeah, we wanted to talk about the opposition, that Kabila has not had a great track record with allowing opposition expression.
Okay. Yeah. Now, let me answer the first question, which is about solving the root cause of the conflict. Yes, I agree. The FDLR has to go home. And there's a program right now. The FDLR needs to go home, and I've said that. They don't need to stay in Congo, and I understand this to be a problem. But what I was saying before is that what brought that as a problem, that's what we need to be dealing with. It's a lack of strong institutions in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. But yes, this FDR need to go back home, because they're a bunch of criminals and they're killing a lot of people in the Democratic Republic of Congo. The second thing is a relationship between the opposition and the current government. I am aware of this, and I agree with you, and that's what I was saying. We need a good, inclusive political system in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. For instance, I'm one of the people that believe today that Bemba should not be sitting in Portugal. I think Bemba should be back in Kinshasa as a senator working. This is how we build institutions. We can't have a country where because you don't agree with me on something, you can no longer be in the country. No. Bemba won 42.7% of the votes, and that's a huge population, and you cannot just say, now we don't want this anymore. And the fact that Bemba is no longer in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, it has made him very, very popular. Even in areas where he was not elected, like in Bukavu, for instance, everybody's saying, oh, we wish we had voted for Bemba. One way to demystify Bemba, if you want to use the word demystifying Bemba, is to bring him back to the DRC. As long as he's in exile, he's a very strong guy, but the opposition and the government need to work much better together.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
There's one guy that's had his hand up all day.
One guy there's got the microphone. Okay, go ahead. Sorry. Last question.
I feel a little...
It better be good, huh?
I'll do what I can. Joe Hall from Save the Children. We saw in the opening film, just taking it back to the beginning, that more than 5 million children are out of school in DRC. First of all, what are your experiences of what's really happening with education in DRC? And I guess looking to the future, if it's possible to, what role do you see education for children playing in development and peace and stability in DRC?
Again, very good question. I think if one thing that will take Congo to a place where it should be is education. I think it's one of the few things that will take it there. And in some, as we mentioned earlier on, the camps, in some camps you have a wonderful image of children skipping through with their little plastic bag, probably the first plastic bag they've ever owned in their life, with school books in it and pencils. And when you see it, you have this kind of feeling of hope. When you see that, you think that there is a future. It may not be this year, it may not be next year, it may not be this decade, but it will be that generation. Maybe it's a little bit too late for the current generation of Congolese, but maybe their children will have the chance to invest and inherit something that is extraordinary.
Yes.
And let's hope that they learn the lessons from organizations like Save the Children, organizations like UNICEF, organizations like very, very great organizations out there that are teaching the current generation of children in DRC. There are other places where the children are not receiving anything, and not even healthcare, never mind education. And that's, I think, as international communities, we need to concentrate on specifically, not just in places like the East, but in the North and in the West and the South too, because it's very easy to concentrate specifically on the conflict areas, but the accessibility in Congo is a very big issue, and it's this accessibility which also leads to the lack of education.
Yeah, Article 43 of the current Congolese constitution.
You know all the articles. Wow.
Well, I'm a Congolese politician, so it's kind of...
Oh, really? Now you're a Congolese politician? Write that down.
Anyway, Article 43 of the Congolese constitution says that primary education is free and mandatory to everybody. Now, the government has not been able to implement this, and the excuse is always there is no money. And I think DFID was in conversation, was in talks with the Congolese government about trying to see how they can pay for the primary school. And so if you have the capacity to be able to influence somebody in the United Kingdom to ensure that we can get free education for our kids in the Democratic Republic of the Congo from grade 1 to grade 6, I think that's what they call it here, it's very, very important. We have a high illiteracy rate in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. I know that there's some initiatives here in the United Kingdom that are meant to try to help. I know there's some organization, I've seen some people here that are involved with some organization in the DRC that are trying to help a lot of people, especially in the forest area. Some of the environmental organizations that are, I've seen a few faces in here that are trying to do that. And I think that's a very, very important thing. We need this so desperately if we can be able to educate our kids, at least the basic education from grade 1 to grade 6. So whatever you can do to be able to help us in the Democratic Republic of Congo, we'll be very grateful to you for it. Thank you.
Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Marcus. Thank you,
Thanks,
Molequa. And thank you, Dina.